For those of you who are just joining us now, I'm Barbara Stevenson and I'm Vice Provost for Global Affairs. We're just going to go another 30 seconds to be sure everyone's had a chance to join us.
Recording in progress.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be hosting today's event on U.S.-Japan relations, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak with our distinguished guest, Ambassador Koji Tomita, U.S. Ambassador of Japan to the United States. I'm Barbara Stevenson, and I'm Carolina's Vice Provost for Global Affairs and Chief Global Officer. Today's event is part of the Diplomatic Discussion Series, an effort to regularly bring diplomats and other foreign policy practitioners to Carolina. It's also an important part of UNC's new diplomacy initiative, one of my signature programs as Vice Provost for Global Affairs. We hope through the initiative to build understanding among the next generation of global leaders of the vital role diplomacy plays in addressing challenges that are increasingly transnational or even global in scope, from climate change to pandemics, to ensuring that emerging technologies support our values rather than undermine our democracies. We seek to build on UNC's standout strengths in area studies, including Asian studies and Japanese studies. UNC is proud to have 5 national resource centers, the most of any university in the American Southeast. After 34 years as an American diplomat, I can see how well positioned UNC is to be and to be seen as a top-tier university for producing the next generation of global leaders, including diplomats, foreign policy professionals, and national security experts. As a former ambassador myself, I know the impact that good diplomacy can have. By building relationships of trust and keeping alliances and partnerships strong, we set the stage for the international cooperation that is essential to addressing global challenges. Today's conversation with Ambassador Tomita continues Carolina's look at U.S. relations with members of the Quad, India, Japan, and Australia, as well as the United States. The first in this series focused on U.S.-India relations, and it took place last spring. I'm so pleased to be able to continue this conversation with Ambassador Tomita, who less than 2 weeks ago joined his prime minister at the White House for a Quad summit hosted by President Biden. As you will hear as I share his bio, Ambassador Tomita is a leader who has worked to strengthen the U.S.-Japan alliance. It's now my pleasure to do a proper introduction. On February 17, 2021, President Joseph Biden received Ambassador Tomita's letter of credence, acknowledging him as Japan's ambassador to the United States. A graduate of the University of Tokyo's Faculty of Law, Ambassador Tomita joined the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs 40 years ago in 1981. Most recently, he served as Japan's ambassador to Korea, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's personal representative for the G20 summit in Osaka, and ambassador to Israel. His other overseas postings have included London and Paris. Apart from his overseas duties, his main professional focus has been on security policy, having been actively involved in the policy and legislative reviews that the Japanese government undertook in this area in recent years, including Japan's legislation for peace and security that has increased Japan's deterrence capabilities. His relationship with the United States began when he studied in North Carolina for a year at Davidson College. Since he entered the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he's held leadership positions in U.S.-Japan relations, including Director General of MOFA's North American Affairs Bureau and Deputy Chief of Mission at the Japanese Embassy in Washington, D.C. In these capacities, he led the Japanese effort to strengthen the Japan-US alliance and to promote mutual understanding between the two nations. I can't think of a better person to talk to us about US-Japan relations, both the historic strength of our decades-long alliance, as well as the future potential of this relationship between the world's first and third largest economies. Ambassador Tomita, we are so lucky to have you with us today. Thank you for taking time to speak with us and with our students. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Stevenson, for your very generous introduction, although it made me feel very old, you know, being in foreign service for 40 years. But let me start by thanking University of Carolina for giving me the opportunity to interact with such a distinguished audience. As Ambassador noted, I have been in foreign service for many years, and a good part of it was spent on managing Japan-US relations, working both in Tokyo and in Washington. But I find myself extremely fortunate in that my first exposure to your country was the beautiful state of North Carolina. As Ambassador said, I spent 1 year at the Davidson College, and I was just a 19-year-old university student who had never set his foot in a foreign country. But the kindness and warmth of the people I encountered left me with a very lasting impression. So in retrospect, I think that experience very much motivated me to go into a diplomatic career, eventually bringing me here as ambassador after all these years. So this feels very much like homecoming, the only regret being it is only a virtual one. So I look forward to doing a real homecoming in not too distant a future. Now, as I was preparing for this webinar, I became very conscious of the fact that the event would fall on the significant political transition in Japan. That is, we have a new Prime Minister, Mr. Hunyakshira. I imagine many of you are wondering how this transition will impact Japan's diplomatic outlook, including Japan-US relations. So before I talk about anything else, let me try to put this development in perspective. If I may start with the general background to the latest political transition, the first thing I should point out is that the previous Prime Minister, Mr. Yoshihide Suga, he started his administration 1 year ago, but he did so with some very distinctive disadvantages. The first disadvantage is, of course, the continuing impact of COVID-19, which has caused tremendous dislocations in our national life, like many other countries in the world. Overall, Japan has been doing a decent job in containing the impact, both in terms of infection and in terms of fatalities. The two major spikes we experienced in the past year came at the worst political timing for Prime Minister Suga. The first major spike in last autumn came as he tried to explore ways to resuscitate our economy by, for instance, giving incentives for domestic travels or dining at restaurants. And while no clear linkage was established between these measures and the spike, the Prime Minister was accused of an error of judgment in easing restrictions prematurely in some people's eyes. Then the second major spike, which started around July this year, coincided with a big public controversy regarding the Olympic and Paralympic Games. As you know, the Prime Minister Suga persevered with his decision to deliver the games, but this decision, which I personally applaud, took its toll on his popularity. Then the second disadvantage for Suga-san was that from the beginning, his administration was saddled with two very significant political time constraints. The one is that his term for the Liberal Democratic Party's presidency was the reminder of the term given to his predecessor, Mr. Shinzo Abe, which is approximately just 1 year. You remember Prime Minister Suga took over that post because of the sudden resignation of Mr. Abe. The other time constraint is that the current term for the lower house of the National Diet was expiring within 1 year from the point Prime Minister Suga took over the government. So which necessitated him to call a general election during this period. So these time constraints meant that the Prime Minister Suga had to clear two big political hurdles within the very short period of 1 year, i.e. the party leadership contest and the general election. And consolidating his public support for these hurdles by making solid progress in political policy agenda, and doing so while fighting the pandemic was, as you can imagine, a daunting task. And in the end, the task proved to be too daunting for Suga-san, and I personally feel very sorry for him. I have had a privilege of working with Mr. Prime Minister Suga, mostly when he was a chief cabinet secretary during the Abe administration. And I really can't think of anyone, with the exception of Prime Minister Abe himself, who has done more to strengthen the alliance between our two countries. And it is rather ironic that since his announcement of impending resignation, we have started seeing the very increasing evidence that his efforts to tackle the pandemic was making real impact, with the dramatic decline in infection and a very robust progress in vaccination. So I hope history will be kind to him. Now, then, what will be the outlook for the new Prime Minister, Hunyakshira? He still has a very full plate in front of him. He has a pandemic to beat and an election to win. But at least he can start his administration with the increasingly stabilizing trend in COVID-19, and he's secure in his position for the party presidency because the recent leadership contest has given him a 3-year term. I personally worked very closely with Kishida-san for a good part of his tenure as foreign minister. I was then Director General for North America Affairs. And apart from his undoubted competence as a political leader, he's one of the most decent men you can ever meet in politics. So I wish all the best for his future endeavor. And policy-wise, I think his main focus will be squarely placed on domestic agenda for the time being. Defeating and recovering from COVID-19 remains a top priority. He has also expressed his determination to seek an optimal balance between growth and equity in our economy. And this task will involve for some fundamental structural changes to our economy and society, which calls for Prime Minister's full attention. That being said, I don't think these domestic priorities will diminish his commitment to the diplomatic goals our country has been seeking in recent years, including realizing a free and open Indo-Pacific region, underpinned by robust alliance between Japan and the United States. So in that sense, you can expect a strong continuity in Japan's diplomatic efforts beyond the recent political transition. As I noted, Mr. Kishida served as a foreign minister for more than 4 years under the Abe administration. He was one of the main architects of foreign policy of that administration. During that period, he established close personal bonds with the leading figures in the Obama administrations, including Joe Biden, Tony Blinken, and John Kerry, who now form the backbone of the current administration. So all in all, I feel very upbeat for the prospect for our alliance as the new administration starts in Japan. Now, moving on to substantive discussions on the prospect for our alliance, what I'd like to do today is, rather than talking about specific aspects of the Japanese relations, I like to put them in the context of a broader strategic picture, because I believe the international relations are now moving into a new phase, painting a very different picture from, say, 10 years ago. And understanding our relations in this light is very important in setting the future direction of our partnership. And the big picture I'm talking about is that the international relations are now increasingly driven by strategic competition between liberal democracy and authoritarianism. And more specifically, there are two critical factors which have been shaping recent evolution in international relations. The one of which is a shift in the US strategic focus to the Indo-Pacific region. And the other is a quest for new alignments of like-minded nations, which also serves as institutional underpinnings for the US leadership in this strategic competition. And as for the shift in the US strategic focus, the main reason why the Biden administration chose not Boris Johnson or Justin Trudeau, but Prime Minister Suga as its first visiting leader, was to send a clear message, clear signal that its strategic interest is squarely placed in the Indo-Pacific region. The US pullout from Afghanistan is another example of the shift of focus. Now, of course, there is a perception in some quarters that the pullout represents the sort of abdication of US leadership, but I beg to disagree. I see the pullout as a necessary step to shift its resources in accordance with the evolving strategic environment, and I fully support that decision. The new alignments of interest among like-minded nations I talked about, on the other hand, include the Quad and AUKUS, which is a recently established framework of cooperation among the US, the UK, and Australia. Although between those two frameworks, I must point out, Quad is not exactly a new framework because it has been in existence for more than a decade in a much more benign form. Actually, Japan has been a very strong proponent of the Quad initiative over the years. But being able to regularize a meeting at the highest level of government is something unthinkable just 1 year ago. As Ambassador Stevenson noted, I was at the White House when the leaders' meeting was held a few weeks ago. And it was really a sight to behold, seeing those four leaders in the East Room of the White House in the United States. These new alignments, Quad and AUKUS, are of course prompted by the recent strategic development in the Indo-Pacific region. There has been much speculation in the media that these new framework are about the big country in our neighborhood. But in my view, they are about the United States as much as they are about that country. They are, as I said, the institutional underpinning for the continued US leadership in the strategic competition. As they try to take on the challenge of this competition, the US leaders, Tony Blinken included, have always emphasized the need to fight this competition from the position of strength. And this strength comes from, first and foremost, the resilience of the country itself, but it also involves working with allies and partners more closely. The traditional alliances, including the Japan-US alliance, represents the most important ingredient in this endeavor. But we need to realize the emerging competition against authoritarianism encompasses the areas far wider than the military competition. Indeed, you can say that the competition will test not only the military strength, but the very efficacy and legitimacy of our system. So this would add new missions to traditional alliances and call for more robust engagement with a wider community of nations sharing our values. So given the kind of evolution in the global strategic picture, the next question is how the evolution will impact our alliance. Or you may ask the same question differently, how Japan can help the US fulfill the leadership role in this new strategic competition. Broadly speaking, I think there are 4 areas in which we can be effective partners. The first area is the effort to further strengthen our alliance by upgrading deterrent and responsive capabilities. In the face of the increasingly troubling security outlook in the region, when Prime Minister Suga visited Washington in April, he and President Biden shared deep concerns about the certain aspects of the Chinese behaviors and agreed on the need to engage China in candid discussions over these issues. Their concerns were reflected in the very tough message addressed to China in the joint statement issued then. Being tough, however, is not the same as being ready. To make sure we are ready for the very diverse contingencies we might have to face in the future, we need to deepen our conversation on how best we can work together to strengthen our deterrent and responsible capabilities. This has been one of the main preoccupations after the summit and will remain so in the coming weeks and months. The second area where we need to work together concerns effort to strengthen our resilience and competitiveness. Again, I refer back to earlier comment about the need to fight the competition from the position of strength. In this respect, our 2 countries are making serious efforts. First, to realize full recovery from the pandemic, and then to make our economy more resilient and competitive. And these efforts should be synergetic. Again, during the April summit, the 2 leaders agreed to launch the so-called core Partnership, CORE, being the combination of the first two letters of its key objectives, i.e. competitiveness and resilience. This partnership will focus, among other things, the joint efforts to maintain our edge in science and technology and innovation, and protect sensitive supply chains for strategic products like a semiconductor and pharmaceuticals. The third area where a stronger partnership between us is needed is the efforts to find solutions to wide-ranging challenges facing the global society. In this area, our top priority remains the ongoing effort to contain and overcome the pandemic. This is exactly why the recent leaders' meeting of Quad placed such a strong focus on vaccine cooperation among its members. Climate change is another challenge calling for our serious attention and effort. Our two governments have decided to start a new climate change partnership, which has strong focus on, among other things, development of relevant technologies, such as hydrogen power. The fourth and final area where Japan can offer its support is the diplomatic efforts to create a broader community of nations sharing our values and principles. I have already mentioned our country has been a driving force behind the development of Quad. And as the United States shifts its strategic focus to the Indo-Pacific region, I believe Japan can play a useful role in facilitating the US engagement with the countries in the region through our extensive network we have nurtured over the years. Finally, it goes without saying whether or not our two countries can work effectively on this new agenda will depend on health and strength of our bilateral relations. Fortunately, our bilateral relations have never been better, but we should not be complacent. We need to continue conscious efforts to strengthen political dialogue, economic and business cooperation, and most importantly, the people-to-people exchanges. In fact, these are exactly the kind of things which I, as ambassador, am most focused on. And I have much to say on these subjects. But alas, I'm running out of my allotted time. So I should stop here, and I would be happy to respond to any queries you may have for the remainder of this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Tomita. That was just a brilliant and very insightful presentation, and I very much thank you for that, and that framing about the international context, that international relations are increasingly driven by a strategic competition between liberal democracies and authoritarian regimes. That was exceedingly well put. Thank you so much. You have in your rather magisterial presentation already covered a number of the topics that I was planning to ask you about. No. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you another question about the Quad to give you another chance to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And so for all of our participants in the webinar, the Quad Summit took place in Washington, D.C. on September 24th. And Ambassador Tomita was there, as he said, in the East Room of the White House as these four leaders gathered. And he told me before we went live with the webinar that it felt like such a historic moment. And I wanted to ask you to talk about that a bit more, Ambassador Tomita, and what is the significance of the Quad to Japan? It's something you've been pushing for quite some time, and it's come to fruition now. Mm-hmm. And what can we expect the Quad to focus on and to deliver?
Well, let me start by explaining what Quad is not. well, Quad is not, embryonic military alliance directed toward any specific country. It's more vehicle for our efforts to create what we call a free and open Indo-Pacific region. There's I cannot deny that there's a strategic, theme underlining this initiative. I was talking about, expanding the community of nations which are sharing values and principles. But if it is often the case that just repeating the mantra, our system is better, liberal democracies is good. I don't think just repeating mantra is actually helping for this objective of expanding the community of nations sharing our values. I think more important thing is to demonstrate in a very tangible way that our system works. That's the reason why the four leaders have been focusing on very practical, specific, and pressing need, facing the Indo-Pacific region. So the number one priority is a vaccination cooperation. There's a project taking place, Japan, U.S., Australia, helping India expand its vaccine production so that the products can be shared broadly in the Indo-Pacific region. So that's one of the examples of the Quad can do. And we are looking at various other, practical areas, like climate change. So that is the general direction of the efforts. But at the same time, apart from doing these practical things, the important thing is to develop habit of cooperation among those four countries. When leaders gather wherever, in the White House or in Japan, they can, compare their notes, their thinking about, how the region is evolving and so on and so forth. This habit of communication, this habit of collaboration would be extremely important in terms of the strategic picture I painted in my presentation.
I completely follow your arguments and think you make a very powerful case there, Ambassador. So thank you for talking further about the Quad, because it is a historic moment. I'm going to ask you the direct question, and you will answer it with skill. Mm-hmm. Some observers see the Quad as motivated by a desire to contain China's rise as a regional and global power. Could you speak about how Japan views China?
Well, first of all, I think we have to accept the China as it is. We should not either overestimate or underestimate China. I talked about in my presentation some of the problematic aspect of Chinese behavior. But at the same time, China is not the Soviet Union. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union was very much one-dimensional power, very strong in military department, but not much power in other departments. China is the second largest economy in the world, deeply integrated into the global economy. And it has 1.4 billion living there. And it also in a position to contribute positively to the efforts to address the broad range of global issues like climate change. So I think it was Tony Blinken who said there are three aspects to the engagement with China: adversarial, collaborative, and cooperative. And no, adversarial, competitive, and collaborative. So I completely agree with his assessment. I think on the one hand, we need to engage China in a very candid conversation. I think Jake Sullivan had just had that sort of conversation with the Yang Jiechi in Zurich today. But at the same time, we should not forget about the other, two aspects, competitive and collaborative. We are not just talking about confrontation. And the other important thing is the stability in the relation between number one economy in the world, and the number two economy in the world is very important. So is the stability in the relation between the number two economy in the world and number three economy in the world. So we share responsibility with the United States to make sure that we have this stability in our relations. So, I dwelled on a little bit, our approach to China, but we need to seek a very complex set of objectives. So it calls for, which means that we call for very close coordination between our two countries.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Tomita, for that really nuanced answer about this. That was really terrific. I know you hit on some of the highlights around COVID-19, but I want to ask you a follow-up question here. We're all struggling. We all continue to struggle with COVID-19, certainly the United States as well. And can you speak to Japan's efforts surrounding COVID-19 and how successful has Japan been with vaccinations? And then I'm going to go ahead and give you the follow-up question from our students, which is, our students are eager to resume studying and research at university partners in Japan. And when do you think they might be able to do that again?
Well, thank you very much, and for that question, because when we had this controversy about the Olympic Games, I think I was a little bit concerned that there was a very rather negative reporting here in the U.S. about the Japan's efforts to address the pandemic, and but overall, as I said in my talks, I think we've been doing a rather decent job in containing the overall infection. The cumulative number of who got infection stand at about 1.7 million, people.
Yeah.
And the fatalities, 18,000. So the statistics have been, here, says that the cumulative number of those people who got the infection in the state of North Carolina is stand at 1.3 million, slightly less than 1.4 million. And the fatality is 16,000. So we have slightly, bigger impact than the state of North Carolina. So that tells you, I mean, even if we take demographic factor into consideration, we are doing a good job. Of course, you can never trivialize the fatalities and the human tragedy. I mean, we are experiencing through this pandemic, but overall, I think we are doing our best. One specific area we have been we've been trying to grapple with is the area of vaccination, and we made a rather slow start. I mean, we started to vaccinate the medical staff in mid-February. But after that, I mean, thanks to Mr. Suga's very strong leadership, we stepped up our efforts tremendously. And I think now the proportion of those people fully vaccinated to the population is about 60%. And for the old age people, almost 90% of the old age people are fully vaccinated. So I think we are, made a very solid progress in vaccination. So much so that, as I said, I mean, in recent week, we started to see a very significant fall in the number of infection, as well as the number of, patient hospitalized, number of fatalities, and so on and so forth. So much so that the government has just decided to lift some of the restrict measures we have placed in some parts of Japan. So generally speaking, I think we are in a good shape. Of course, you never be complacent. I think we have to remain vigilant. The second part of your question, I mean, the COVID, the impact on the various types of exchanges, including academic exchange, is a matter of serious concern for me personally. I've been, saddened by the fact that a number of very good programs existing between the two countries. For instance, the JET program, under which we, recruit young people from the United States to be English teacher in Japan. We need to suspend this program for some period, but we are gradually resuming these programs. So as we see more stabilization of the situation, I think we will be able to get back to normal slowly. But at the same time, I think the one silver lining to the pandemic is this encouraged us to seek, more sort of creative way of interaction. Particularly the taking advantage of the electronic means. So I think there are ways to maintain the certain degree of communication using these new techniques. So I look forward to full resumption of exchanges between two countries. But in the meantime, there are things we can do to compensate the loss of exchanges we experiencing in recent time.
Things like this, Mr. Ambassador, having you spend this time talking to our students and getting them to think about the importance of this relationship. So thank you. I know we're eager. I'm going to continue on this theme. Here at UNC, we hope to take an interdisciplinary team to Japan in 2022, if everything works out, to explore a multifaceted partnership with Japan to address the shared challenge of aging societies. And through academic exchange and research, both of our societies stand to benefit from collaboration. And this would involve our strength at UNC in longitudinal data sets and merging with you with your strength in artificial intelligence. Could you talk about the role of higher education institutions in forging this kind of collaboration, these people-to-people ties, and in sharing knowledge and collectively addressing common challenges, from aging societies to clean energy to climate change to pandemics?
Well, absolutely. I mean, Japan and the United States share, a wide range of policy issues, policy challenges, including some of the issues you mentioned, the aging and climate change and so on and so forth. So, of course, the government try to, as I said in my presentation, the governments are trying to grapple with the efforts to address these challenges, but at the same time, these challenges call for all stakeholder efforts, and of course we have to get the business people on board in these efforts. But the academic exchange, communication between universities, researchers, the students, I think they are would be the very critical element of the all stakeholder efforts I'm talking about. And so I'm all for the efforts being made at UN University. I think you have studied very interesting interactive student exchanges with some of the universities in Japan, including Jochi University. And again, I come back to the point I made earlier, because of the constraint imposed by the pandemic, I think this creative way of engaging each other is extremely important. So I very much look forward to seeing more progress in this area. Particularly, I'm conscious that Japan has a very long-standing connection with the university. I think the first Japanese student studying at the university dates back to 19th century. So we have, 100 years tradition to work on. So I think we can look forward to a very, mutually productive cooperative relations in the future.
Thank you for mentioning that, Ambassador Tomita. We're very proud of that. And you probably also know the story that after the bombs were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the United States this university gave books to the library, and then in return, we have just outside the office a piece of tile from a rooftop, and it's such a reminder of how good this relationship is today and why it's so important to keep it strong. So these ties are deep and they're very heartfelt. So thank you. And we have a very strong Japanese language program. So we're raising that next generation. Ambassador, I have questions from the students in History 134, Modern East Asia, taught by Dr. Kevin Fogg. And if I might, I'd like to turn to some questions from our students. One is this: what is the current direction of Japan's military? Is it growing? Is it shrinking in power? And I know you're a security expert, so no better person than you to ask that question.
Well, as far as the security policy is concerned, I think the recent efforts have been focusing on two areas. One is there have been, for a long time, various legal constraints on the conduct of military activities in Japan, stemming from our very unfortunate experience in the last war and the famous peace constitution, drafted out of this tragedy. But in recent years, Japan is being required to play a more proactive role in the security area.
Sure.
When I was a director of National Security Division, just in the wake of 9/11, we had to introduce special measure legislation to enable our self-defense forces to be part of the global operations in Afghanistan. And also a few years later, we needed the same sort of special measures legislation to participate in operation in Iraq. So the recent year, I think we have been trying to establish the right framework for us to play a role commensurate with the international position. And the peace legislation you mentioned in my introduction, I think is a sort of culmination of these recent efforts. So with this legislation, I think we are in a very good position to play this role. The second area of focus in our security policy is to adjust our focus in accordance with the changing, security environment in the region. The security alliance between Japan and the United States was concluded more than 50 years ago. And originally, I think we are just under this alliance, we are looking just two scenarios. The one is a massive land invasion by the Soviet Union from up north. The other is the contingency on the Korean Peninsula spilling over to Japan. So basically, these are the two scenarios we are looking at. And we have created, the military posture geared to these two contingencies. But, we have now completely different set of challenges. You have to prepare for, sudden missile launches from whom, and you also have to be prepared, for instance, the low intensity, spat developing into a more serious confrontation in our vicinities. So we need to adjust, our, focuses, our outlook for the security picture, and accordingly, we have to adjust our, defense planning. Accordingly, we have to adjust our, toolkit, including the military asset. So those two areas are, I think, the two areas we've been focusing in the security policy. But I think this is going to be an evolving process. The security picture in the region is changing rapidly. So, but just to give you the sense of what we are heading, I just explained rather extensively about what happening in recent years.
Ambassador Tomita, the one time I had the pleasure of visiting Japan was when I was the deputy coordinator for Iraq. And it was to come over and thank Japan really for standing with the United States and having your own provincial reconstruction team and providing the C-130 flights that were so important to keep civilians moving in and out. So as a former American diplomat, I want to extend my thanks again for that, because I know it was a big step for Japan in that direction. Yeah. So we've got a question from our audience, and it's a sophisticated question. Yeah. Ready? How should the US and Japan create multilateral ties with countries that have not fully embraced liberal democratic values? For example, certain Asean and Pacific Island countries, but are also unaligned with autocratic nations?
That's a very difficult question, because I was talking about, competition between values, liberal democracies and authoritarianisms. Right. And our values certainly include certain democratic principles. Yes. So as we try to engage all these countries, we need to take into consideration, whether these countries really share, these values. Take example of Myanmar, for instance, or Burma. We share very deep concern about what's happening in that country. So, but at the same time, there is a broader security strategy picture that we need to take into consideration, and also in order to encourage them to move closer to the kind of system we like see them to be in, I think we need to continue engaging these countries.
Mhm.
Also, our own behaviors also matter. So that's the reason why I was talking about the practical effort within the Quad, for instance, the need to demonstrate that our system works.
Yes.
So, of course, we need to strike a right balance. Trying to maintain our principles, values in the international relations, and the need to create the broader community of nations sharing our values and principles. So, it's a very complicating balancing act.
Yes.
And then there's no, one size fit all, solution. So that's the reason why I think it takes even more closer communication between Japan and the United States over these issues.
I think you're so right about that. I think you're so right. Ambassador, I'm going to end with one more question from Ambassador Fogg's Modern East Asian History class. It's a little bit more about being an ambassador, and it's a fun question. It's probably got a short answer, but what random skill have you found to be surprisingly useful in your role as ambassador?
Well, random skill. Let's see. I'm
probably not speaking fluent English. No one would call that random.
I'm an incredibly talentless individual, and but I always thought that the most important quality for a successful diplomat is a curiosity. You have to be curious about the things surrounding you.
Yes.
And you have to take an active interest in whatever subject, whatever countries you're working with. And so I have no talent in anything whatsoever, but I'm a very curious person. So that has helped me doing this job.
Ambassador Tomita, to hear someone as accomplished as you as a diplomat say you have no talent in anything is an exercise in humility for all of us. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, not only about U.S. Japan relations, but about really the larger geostrategic context we find ourselves in. Your remarks were so full of wisdom. I'd also like to thank the scores of students and faculty who joined us today. I think all of us at UNC can agree that this has been a superb diplomatic discussion. And Ambassador Tomita, we at UNC are grateful for the cooperation of your embassy as we seek to build closer and more extensive partnerships with universities and other institutions in Japan to collaborate in solving shared challenges. Through your talk today, you provided a basis for all of us, from political science and Japanese studies majors to biomedical engineers, to better understand the U.S.-Japan alliance in the context for future collaboration. Please accept our sincere thanks for a really superb talk today. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you very much. And let me just say that I'm a very very strong supporter of your basketball program. So let me extend my best wishes for the Tar Heels for the coming season.
Oh, Ambassador Tomita, I do have a note from the Japan Center which says, thank you for your time today, Ambassador Tomita. We look forward to welcoming you back to North Carolina in the near future. Now that I know that you are a fan of our Tar Heel basketball team, I believe what I know we need to do, which is invite you for a basketball game.
Well, look forward to that.
It's such a great experience. You'll love it. Okay, we will invite you back to join us for basketball.
Right. Okay.
Right. Thank
Well,
you,
thank you very
Ambassador
much.
Tomita. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
Take good care, sir. Bye-bye.
Right.